The darkness in my chamber has become familiar, almost comforting. I sat by the window, watching the moon paint silver patterns across the garden where I once walked with him. The palace breathed around me, settling stones, distant footsteps, the whisper of silk against marble. Once, these sounds meant home. Now they feel like the heartbeat of a tomb. My fingers found the edge of the drawer I'd avoided for months, trembling as they traced the carved roses along its edge. Darius had commissioned it for our first anniversary. "So you'll always have a place for our memories," he'd said. Inside, folded with the reverence of a prayer, lay parchment so worn at the edges I wondered how it hadn't crumbled to dust. My name was the first thing I saw, Althea, in his bold, confident script, back when my name in his hand meant something. My dearest Althea, my starlight. The words wrapped around me like arms that once did, back when I was someone worth holding. I dream of our children running through the gardens, laughing like you do when you think no one is watching. I dream of teaching our son to ride, of braiding our daughter's hair. I dream of growing old beside you, watching our legacy bloom in faces that carry pieces of us both. I remembered that girl, me then, laughing easily at his terrible jokes, believing in things like forever and children who would have his eyes and my stubborn chin. So foolish, so beautifully, devastatingly foolish. You are my heart, my crown, my everything. Without you, I am just a man with a title. With you, I am a king worthy of legends. I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes, letting the pain rise like floodwater, letting it drown me, just for a moment. You promised, I whispered to the empty room. You promised you'd wait. Then came the knock, soft, hesitant. Not the authoritative rap of a servant or the urgent summons of council business. This knock knew it was crossing a line. I wiped my tears quickly, folded the letter with shaking hands, and tucked it away like a guilty secret. Come, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, a queen's voice, even in ruin. And then he stepped inside. Cassius always enters like the room might shatter around him. Careful, kind, too kind for a world that rewards cruelty. Althea, he said, then caught himself, color rising in his cheeks. Your Majesty. I didn't correct him. Not tonight. You shouldn't be here, I said, though my heart betrayed me with how it lifted at the sight of him. He closed the door, and I heard it softly click behind him, a sound like a secret being made. Have you eaten? I looked down at my lap, at hands that seemed too pale, too thin. I'm not hungry. That's not what I asked. The gentleness in his voice nearly undid me. When had anyone last asked about my needs instead of my duties? He sat in the chair across from me, the same chair where Darius once sat to read me poems, where he'd knelt to propose, where he'd held my hand through 3 miscarriages. Cassius settled into it like he belonged there, and perhaps that's what frightened me most. He always smelled like cedar and rain, so different from the honeyed perfume that lingered in every hallway now, sweet and cloying as overripe fruit. Meredith is worried about you, he said. She says you barely sleep, that you stand at this window for hours. Meredith worries too much. Do we? I met his eyes then, gray like storm clouds, nothing like his brother's warm brown. Where Darius's gaze had once consumed me, Cassius's simply held me. Steady, safe. You can't keep doing this to yourself, he said, fading like this. I'm still here, I murmured, though it felt like a lie. What was left of me? What remained when you stripped away wife, mother, lover, just a crown and a title, and the hollow echo of who I used to be? I think about it sometimes, he said, and something in his tone made my breath catch. If it had been me, if you had been free to choose. Don't, I snapped, sharper than I intended, because I thought about it too. In the dark hours when sleep wouldn't come, when the silence pressed against my ribs like a physical weight. But he didn't stop. I wonder what it might have been like if we'd met first, if I'd been the one to see you laugh at the spring festival, if I'd been the one brave enough to ask you to dance. My hand found my wedding ring, white gold and sapphires cold against my skin. I twisted it, grounding myself in the sharp edges of duty and vows. I am the queen, I said. I made promises to a man who doesn't look at you anymore. The words hit like a physical blow, because they were true, because I'd been pretending they weren't. I stood, heart pounding, needing air, needing space, needing something other than this suffocating tenderness that threatened to crack me open. You should go. He stood too, and we were suddenly close enough that I could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin. You don't have to wear the crown alone, he whispered. For a moment, just one suspended breath, I let myself imagine it, leaning into him, letting someone else be strong, letting myself be held by hands that wouldn't calculate the political ramifications of every touch. But queens don't get to choose comfort over duty. Yes, I said, stepping back. I do. He studied my face like he was memorizing it, then nodded once. As you wish, Your Majesty. But as he reached for the door, I heard it. Her laughter, muffled, distant, but not far enough. Never far enough. Cassius froze, his hand on the handle. He heard it too. I'm sorry, he said, and I knew he meant more than just the interruption. He left, and as the silence reclaimed the room, their voices drifted through the walls like smoke, hers especially. Evelyn's, light and sweet, and so devastatingly alive. Oh, feel here, the little one is so active tonight. What names have you chosen, my lady? Leora, if it's a girl. The name struck me like a bell. She's choosing names. She's making plans. She's becoming a mother while I remain a ghost haunting the halls of my own home. I pressed a hand to my stomach. Instinct, memory, emptiness. Cassian, if it's a boy, she added, dreamy and content. There was laughter, the kind that lives in full bellies and full hearts, and the certainty that tomorrow will be better than today. I had my names too. Ilara, Matthias, Sophia. A maid giggled. The king said he wants the baby to have your eyes. I clenched the windowsill until my knuckles went white. He never said that to me. Never read parenting books, or worried about names, or wondered aloud about tiny hands and first steps. When I was pregnant, he'd been careful, protective, but distant, like I was a fragile vase that might shatter if he loved me too hard. And then his voice, warm with the kind of joy I'd forgotten he possessed. How are my girls tonight? My girls. Not my queen, not my wife, not the woman who'd given up her childhood dreams to wear his crown. They laughed again. Eveline, Darius, and their unborn child safe in a womb that worked the way mine never could. And I stood there, trying not to fall apart, trying to breathe around the glass in my chest. I had dreams too, and I had a key I hadn't used in 3 years. Until tonight. 3 years ago, the nursery had been perfect. I remember how warm the light was that day, golden and soft like honey. I walked slowly, one hand on my belly, smiling with every step because I could feel them, small, insistent kicks that promised life. The walls were soft cream, hand-painted with vines of morning glories, a cradle carved from mahogany, inlaid with mother-of-pearl stars, a rocking chair by the window where I planned to nurse and sing lullabies. Books lined the shelves, fairy tales and poems and stories of brave princesses who saved themselves. A plush lion sat in the corner, golden mane soft as silk. For courage, Darius had said when he gave it to me, his hand covering mine on my swollen belly. And what if they're timid like you were as a boy? I teased. Then they'll be kind, he'd replied, kissing my forehead. And that's even better than brave. He'd said he loved us, both of us. I'd believed him, until the next morning, when the pain came like a storm, and the blood wouldn't stop, and the silence that followed was louder than any scream. It's not your fault, he'd whispered afterward, holding me while I shook. But he looked at me differently after that, like I was a graveyard instead of a garden, like I was something broken that couldn't be fixed. The nursery was sealed that day. Tonight, I unlocked the door. The air was thick with dust and silence, and the ghosts of dreams deferred. Moonlight streamed through windows that hadn't been opened in years, illuminating everything like a museum of might-have-beens. Everything was just as I'd left it. The cradle with its mobile of silver stars. The blanket I'd stitched by hand during long winter afternoons, each stitch a prayer. The rocking chair that had never rocked a baby to sleep. I touched each thing like it might vanish if I blinked. The tiny clothes folded in the wardrobe, the wooden horse Cassius had carved, the music box that played a lullaby I'd never gotten to sing. Then I found the lion, still soft, still waiting. I held it to my chest and whispered the names like an incantation. Ilara, Matthias, Sophia. Children I'd never hold but had loved with every fiber of my being. Children who live now only in the secret chambers of my heart. I sank into the rocking chair and let myself cry. Ugly, full, shattering sobs that came from the deepest places of my soul. 3 years of hidden grief poured out of me like poison from a wound. I had carried this alone, hidden it beneath gowns and titles, and the perfect poise expected of queens. But in this room, surrounded by the remnants of my broken dreams, I let myself feel everything. And somewhere between the tears and the rage and the crushing weight of loss, something shifted. Not just grief, something else. Something that felt like fire. I stood, catching my reflection in the dark glass, tear-stained, hollow-eyed, but standing, still standing. "You will not erase me," I said to the darkness, to the palace, to the woman down the hall who thought she could simply step into my place. Not Evelyn, not Darius, not this kingdom that would forget me the moment I stopped being useful. I am Queen Althea. I have buried children and survived betrayal and worn a crown that cuts as much as it crowns. And I am not done yet. I kissed the lion's forehead and placed it back in the corner where it belonged. Someday, perhaps, there would be children here again. Perhaps not mine, but loved nonetheless. But tonight, I had remembered something crucial. A queen is not just the wife of a king. She is the mother of a kingdom. And this kingdom, these people, they were still mine to protect, even if my own heart was not.